There's no argument that distortion is the greatest effect ever created for the electric guitar. So today I'm going to take you back about 70 years to its origin stories. We're going to go from there and bounce forward through the decades because different technologies and different forms of this effect existed as we moved forward. I'm really excited because this is the heartbeat of electric guitar. So let's jump right into why this effect is so important. Okay, let's open something up, but not just any old thing. It's something pretty special today. Extra special. So episode 7, I did a little thing on boost and I talked about how loud is more good, and I said, would you guys like a t-shirt? And you said yes. Lots and lots of times did you say yes. We've seen that scattered throughout all the comments of all the episodes. So in this bag is something that I'm pretty proud of. Let's open it up. It was dropped off to me the other day. Here it is. It is the sample to the first ever JHS Vlog t-shirt. Loud is more good. What we have here is a dinosaur with headphones on, crushing a librarian who just wants things to be quiet, but they can't because loud is more good. My good friend drew this. It's custom artwork just for this shirt, and we're gonna do these quarterly. So here's how this is gonna work. I'm gonna lay it out real simple. This is the first ever shirt, and you need to click the info in the YouTube section down below, and there's a link there. You click that link and you're gonna go in and get it on the pre-order. You have 30 days to order this. Once we shut that link down, it's over. This shirt will never exist again. We're gonna do them in limited runs, and then in about a quarter, you're gonna see a new vlog themed t-shirt. Real simple, real basic, and really, really exciting. I'm pretty pumped. I'm gonna go put this on because we're doing an episode on distortion, and loud is definitely more good. All right, let's jump in, set some ground rules here because I'm gonna start at about 1950. And I'm gonna kind of come through today with these different technologies of distortion. I am not in any way gonna bring up or talk about tube screamers and overdrive pedals. I'm not really interested in that for this episode. It's important, just know it's there around 1978. You're gonna see a gaping hole and a lot of you are gonna be like, what about the tube screamer? Well, for this episode, I just don't care. It's another episode. I'm gonna focus mainly on distortions and carry that through the decades. Another thing is that I would recommend that if you like this episode and this kind of stuff, that you go watch my Origin of Fuzz. And then also there's an episode called Why You Need Boost Pedals. That's where the Loud is More Good t-shirt came from. Those lay out some really nice finer details about those stories within Fuzz, and then how boost pedals and the actual signal from our guitars, the invention of the humbucker, some different things right in that category kind of help create distortion as well. So those are two very valuable things to know. With that said, let's get right to it. The first thing we're gonna look at is a 1949 Fender Deluxe. This is a TV front because it kind of looks like a TV. And in 1951, Howlin' Wolf's guitar player took an amp much like this and cranked it up on a song called How Many More Years. When the amp's clean, it's clean. And that's what it was intended to be, but he turned it up. People were scared to turn it up, but when he did, it was pretty awesome. And it's one of the first recorded fuzz tones ever, and it's actually achieved by distorting the tube amplifier. From turning up a tube amp, we also get into a couple of strange things. One of them is that around 1951, the guitarist on a really cool track called Rocket 88 supposedly took a pin of some sort and jabbed little holes all in the speaker. That was what he says makes the distortion sound on that track. One of the most famous stories about how all this got started, distorting the guitar, is the story of the Kinks. And for that I have a speaker here. So around 1964 you have the Davies brothers, and they argue all the time and apparently didn't get along well, and there's two versions of this story. Ray says that he took the knitting needle that he had. Why did he have a knitting needle? Who knows? And he stabbed a bunch of holes in the speaker. Well, his brother Dave says that's an absolute lie, and he says he took a razor blade. Basically, he did this, jabbed it in, and just cut a hole in the speaker, and that distorted the sound. I think it's pretty pivotal, and when you listen to You Really Got Me, you hear the sound of a not clean guitar. It's a very unique distortion, and it's a very unique process. Let's jump to 1960 into what I think is the story that kind of spearheads everything guitar effect related. I think it's really pivotal, and I think it's really important. And the setting is a Nashville studio recording a country artist named Marty Robbins. Basically, the bass player's plugged into the mixing console, and there's a problem with that channel, and it distorts out. The track is called Don't Worry. You can go check it out on YouTube. All of a sudden, you just hear this crazy, distorted, fuzzy guitar coming through on this pop country track. It's crazy, it's insane, it should not be there. There's even arguments over, do we keep it in the recording? Well, they did, and there was a guy in the room named Glenn Snoddy, and he took that sound and made a little box to recreate it in real time. And legend goes, he had a friend who worked in Kalamazoo, Michigan at Gibson, and it became the Maestro Fuzz-Tone. So this guy, 1962, is really important. It's 2 years after that accident in a Nashville studio. And they release it and they market it to bass players. They're telling bass players, make your bass sound different. Well, it didn't fly that well. So they then market it towards guitars. They actually released a little 7-inch vinyl, a demonstration thing that you could go pick up and get a hold of. And it said to us guitar players, hey, make your guitar sound like a tuba, make it sound like a banjo or a cello and all these weird things, but nobody really cared. They sold 5,000 units originally on its release, but nobody bought them. And then it said that probably only 3 to 5 of these shipped for an entire year in 1964. So this was an epic #fail. Until Keith Richards in 1965 used it on the song Satisfaction. And in his biography, he actually talks about he just used it to track a horn part. The dun 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 dun. That was just a horn part, and they didn't have a horn player. So even when he got a hold of this pedal, he was just trying to mimic a horn. But that set fuzz on the course that we know today. It made fuzz a household name for guitar players. Everybody wanted one, and it forever changed the scene. Keith is even quoted saying that the first time he heard Satisfaction on the radio, they were on tour and he's in Minnesota. They didn't even know that their manager had released this track, and he heard the song over the radio and panicked. He freaked out because it sounded so insane. Put yourself in 1965 and listen to this thing. And that riff is crazy wild for the time. So much so that the guy who played the riff kinda didn't like it. So a few months later, late 1965, after the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction is topping the charts and it's causing fuzz to be a thing that every guitarist wants, we have a really cool situation happen in London. Basically, a session guitarist in Soho walks up to a music shop called Macari Brothers, and he takes this up to the counter. He says, this is cool, you know, it's rare, it's American, there's not many of them over here, but man, I wish someone could tweak it. Can you add more bass and more sustain? Well, an engineer on staff there did just that, and he created the Tone Bender. This is such an important piece of rock history and distortion history. Can you imagine the Yardbirds without this? Can you imagine Jeff Beck? And what if Jimmy Page had never plugged into a Tone Bender? We wouldn't have Led Zeppelin. It's a massive, massive piece of the story and probably one of the coolest moments in this entire timeline. 1966 brought us yet another fuzz pedal. It was Jimi Hendrix's fuzz of choice. It was the Dallas Arbiter Fuzz Face. Now this pedal comes right from the Tone Bender 1.5. It's almost a part-for-part replica of it, but it was mass manufactured and it's one of the most popular and most well-known because of how many of these were made and because it was at the foot of Jimi Hendrix. So from 1966 with that Arbiter Fuzz Face up to 69, we see more and more guitar amps that sound awesome. They distort more and more as you turn them up. Guitarists are wanting this sound and designers are giving it to them. In 1969, Mike Matthews asked his friend Bob Meyer to help him invent a brand new product, a distortion fuzzbox sustainer, and it's the Big Muff version 1. This is pivotal because it's one of the first pieces of guitar gear that ever markets itself as distortion. That word became the word that everyone wanted, and this at the time was the product that everyone had to have. Most of you have owned a Big Muff of some sort, but this is where it started in 1969. The early 1970s continued to be dominated by loud amps and fuzz boxes for the most part. But around 1977-78, a new form of distortion had kind of entered the scene. It was using an operational amplifier instead of single transistors and a method called hard clipping, which actually clipped off the signal in a very aggressive way. And 3 famous stomp boxes were born in basically the same year. The first is the Distortion Plus by MXR. This box is awesome because it works so well and it's so simple. Just turn the distortion knob where you want it to go and crank the volume. On an already loud amplifier, this thing is a dream. It's my favorite for slide guitar. That same year in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where that Maestro Fuzz-Tone was made, there's a happy accident and a guy makes the RAT pedal. The very first ones were just kind of him goofing off and making them for friends. There were 12 of them made, and then a year later he went to mass production, and we all know what happened. This thing became extremely popular. I would have to say, on a desert island, this is in my top 10 pedals ever. On certain days, it might be in my top 2 or 3. It's one of the first pedals I ever got that I really, really fell in love with. And it's just really hard to beat because it covers clean tones all the way to raging fuzz. Third classic that just happened to come out in 1978 is the Boss DS1. It literally is the distortion pedal. When you say distortion pedal, or at least for me, an orange box pops up into my head. It's a cultural pop icon to me. There's nothing more distortion than this box. So 78 was a really good year. This pedal, I mean, they're everywhere. I think you've all owned this pedal. If you haven't, you need to go pick it up because it's exceptional. It gets a lot of hate. I don't know why. That's kind of dumb because it's so amazing. It works great on loud and already dirty amplifiers, and it's a go-to for some of the best rock recordings ever. Here I am. I was just behind this half stack. It's that big because it's 1980. 1980 was all about big. Big sounds, big guitar solos, big rock, and big distortion. And the JCM 800 was the culprit of most of that. I have two Marshalls here because it's worth mentioning the JCM 900. It's real easy to understand these and why they're different. 800 stood for the 80s because that's when it came out. 900 came out in the 90s. I think you get it. This is one of the most iconic distortion sounds ever. This 800 head through a 412 cab. 1982 gave us one of the most awesome distortion pedals ever, but it got overshadowed by the TS9. It's the TS9's younger brother, the SD9 Sonic Distortion. This thing's so cool. Some of my favorite artists have used it, and it's a real sleeper. I really love it. I've always loved it, and I just don't see it anywhere, which is such a shame. So maybe you can go check it out, buy one, and own one of the coolest distortions ever made. The 1990s had so much gear in it, I couldn't even possibly cover the basses. But I'll just show you a couple of my favorite distortions from that decade because they're awesome. First of all, the Boss Metalzone. You know, whatever. I hear you mumbling, I hear you murmuring, but until you plug this into a good, clean, loud amplifier and really spend some time with it, you have been tricked. You have been led astray. This is a great pedal and it does the job really well. And it's actually super versatile. Don't take my word for it, you need to try it yourself. My favorite 90s distortion might be the Supra Distortion Extreme. These DoD pedals are super cool. There's all kinds of variations of this circuit, and the DoD line was massive in this era. But this pedal's cool, and you know, it says extreme, like, it's not good enough just to be distorted. Like, the 90s, you needed like extreme distortion, so they gave it to you. The current era of distortion and fuzz, it's kind of insane how many there are. I couldn't even scratch the surface if I wanted to, telling you all the things I love, all the things that are available today. Some of my favorites, though, I will toss out there, you know, like the Zvex Fuzz Factory. This was a game changer when it came out. What's cool is it's really just throwing back to a fuzz face, but it does it in a really creative way. Then we've got Big Ear Company's Woodcutter. This is basically just an amazing Rat. It's probably my favorite Rat replica ever made, and it does the job. But once again, it kind of throws back to the vintage day of distortion, the late 70s. The Park Sound Fuzz, Earthquaker makes this. This is just an amazing tone bender. You see the point? All these things are throwing back to these classic eras of the 80s, the 70s, and the 60s. And we kind of keep going back to what everything came from. Everyone loves a good crank tube amp. Everyone loves the classic sounds. And so even our new creations toss back to those. I'll throw one of mine in there. It's the Angry Charlie, and it's really just the JCM 800 sound that you heard earlier. It's a super pivotal and amazing sound, but really, it's tossing back to 1980, to Marshall. And we still love it today, and that's why it's one of my best-selling pedals, because everybody wants that classic sound. That's what's fun about distortion. Distortion doesn't have to necessarily be new anymore. It can just be new flavors of the same thing. It can be new takes and new approaches to some of these classic ways to distort. So whether you're turning up your guitar or turning up a fuzz pedal, there's a way to distort uniquely. There's something that you can do with it, with your guitar and your amp and your pedals. So I challenge you to sit down with your rig and practice making some new distortion sounds. Turn some knobs in a different way. Do something a little different. You might be really surprised what happens. Today's record time is brought to you by the 1964 debut album of the Kinks. Now, this is a pretty serious record for distortion history because it features the hit single, You Really Got Me. And you know what makes this album really amazing is that they were like the first original British feuding brothers. You have the Gallagher brothers of Oasis in the 90s, but way before that, you got the Davies brothers. So it's pretty cool to listen to this record. It's got a family thing going on, a rock and roll thing, and you got these really cool overdrive distortion tones happening from the amps, the torn speakers, and just good songwriting. So you've heard You Really Got Me, but I challenge you, go put this record on, listen to the whole thing, and then re-listen to You Really Got Me. Put yourself in 64, put yourself at a turntable, and think about what that was like to hear distortion in that way for the first time. That's it for this episode. My biggest takeaway from filming this today is just the big realization that a lot of the things that I create and gravitate towards are just really these original distortion tones from how it all started. I think as a player, I'm that way too. I think you guys might agree that some of the best tones ever, these distorted turned up amps and these primitive fuzz pedals, they're kind of what we all want. We still gravitate back. So maybe it's just one of these cases that you really can't reinvent the wheel, that we're always gonna pay tribute back to these origins of distortion. I think that's cool. So here's what I need from you though. I need two things. I want in the comments you to tell me your favorite recorded distortion tone. Just tell me the artist and the song or the album, your favorite tone that's a distortion tone on a record. And then second, I want to know about your distortion tone in your rig. Tell me about your amp, your guitar, and your pedals. Tell me how you get your #1 favorite distortion tone that you get currently in your rig. I'd love to see that. And then last but not least, you gotta click the link in the description of this video and get in on this shirt. You do not wanna miss it. Go over there, get your pre-order in. We're gonna let those pre-order for just several weeks, probably just like 4 weeks, and then we're gonna ship them out once they come in. So we're looking at not too long and you'll be wearing the shirt that I have on. So don't miss that. If you like this episode, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon. That'll give you notifications of future episodes. That's all I got for today. This was a real blast. Go turn your guitar up because loud is more good. Make some distortion. Annoy a few people because that's rock and roll. That's why you started playing guitar. Just go do it. Turn it up. 2000s, there has to be an honorable mention. Inside this beast is a tiny speaker being pushed by digital madness. It's important because this amp has a clean channel, a crunch channel. It has a metal channel. They just skipped distortion. And then, there it is. With the push of a button, it's called Insane.